First up, thank you to everyone who's watching. Especially, I got a special place in my heart for the people who tune into this stuff live. Welcome to another episode of Patrick Miller's podcast, stream show, True Love Making with Pat the Flip, whatever you want to call it. Today we're going to talk about game plans and how to make them, because they're super awesome. If you caught my last video on fighting games about improving your learning mentality and figuring out why it is that you lose, game plans are one of those things that can help you both discover why you lose after you lose, but they'll also help you make decisions in like when you're actually in the game, and it'll help you speed up your decision making process, so you don't have to worry about the stuff that's not relevant. You can focus on the stuff that you got to do to win. Super important. Also super important for guiding the way that you explore new characters. It'll help you find their power faster. But before we go over the game plan stuff, which is going to be a lot of fun, I just wanted to cover some quick housekeeping for people who have been either tuning into the stream or watching the videos on YouTube and that kind of stuff. So, first off, some people have brought up that these like lectures are pretty long, and they wish that they'd be more visually engaging, or they wish to be shorter. I would love to do shorter form stuff whenever I can, but sometimes I don't have the time to prep like a scripted version, and I think there is actually something valuable to listening to me talk for hours. However, I'm not a big fan of listening to me talk for hours all the time anyway, and I'm sympathetic to people who are like, yeah, the video format for an hour long, not so much. So what I've done is I'm going to be posting my show notes for every episode that I do for these lectures on my Tumblr. I tweet that out as well. I put the link in the YouTube comments. So if you'd rather read the show first and see, it's not 100% of everything that's in there, right? And it's formatted so that I can read them. It's not formatted so that it makes sense as an essay. But you can read that, it's much quicker, and then you can decide if you want to watch the video based on that. I've also started creating a podcast with just the audio rips from all the lectures and interviews that I've been doing, if you've been catching those on the channel. So if you want, check out the podcast instead, especially if you can't catch this live. If you can check out the podcast, and you'll get it's easier, especially if you're on a commute and you want to just subscribe. I'm on iTunes, I'm on SoundCloud, so I'll post those links in the YouTube description, and you can just check it out there. Like, the most important thing to me is that the people who want this kind of stuff can get it, and they can get it however they want it. And if I can do easy stuff like just ripping stuff and putting it in a podcast, then I'm going to go ahead and do that. So check it out. If that format works best for you, especially for like on-demand content, let me know, and I'll keep on posting that for sure. Also, thank you to everyone who started checking my stuff out because of that Why You Lose video. Is super well received. I really appreciate the love, and especially for everyone who's been following me on Twitch and YouTube. It helps a lot to know that this kind of stuff that I'm talking about is resonating with you. So please keep on tuning in whenever you have time. If you can't check out the stream, check out the videos, check out the podcast, whatever. And also, if you can share my stuff on Twitter or Reddit or whatever, it helps a lot, right? Like, I try and make this not so just that you can get better, but it's also so that you can get your friends better. Because really, like, that's what fighting games gave me, is they gave me something that I can work out with my friends, and we can compete against each other, but we can also improve. So anything you can do to share my stuff, especially when you think there's something I say that's relevant to one of your training partners or whatever, I appreciate it a lot. So thank you. The last thing that I wanted to cover in terms of housekeeping was I wanted to talk a little bit about what I'm trying to do here, especially because Street Fighter V is coming out, and there's going to be a lot of people posting a lot of different kind of videos, trying to help newcomers and establish their reputation as like an educator in the scene and everything, and that's totally cool. I will tell you up front, don't come to me for like technology videos or character specific stuff, because for the most part, I'm not very good at that. There are a lot of people out there who are way better than I am at dissecting the intricacies of any given game, figuring out different setups, showing their stuff, like tech videos or combo videos or whatever. That's not really my strength. What I'm really interested in doing is helping you learn, right? Because to me, fighting games are not just an exercise in how to get better, but how to learn how to get better. The skills that I learned playing fighting games have been applicable to every other skill that I've acquired in my life. And part of it is that this teaches you how to improve pretty much on your own, right? We don't have a whole lot of professional coaches or teachers in fighting games or in video games in general. But when you think about how hard it is to learn how to play a fighting game, anything of comparative difficulty elsewhere in your life, whether it's learning how to play a musical instrument, learning actual martial arts, learning math, whatever, all that stuff, you usually have teachers and you have classes as one pretty good way of learning. we don't really have that yet. And so and so this is kind of how I think of my stream lectures. I think of it as the replacement for a class, right? But I'm not going to be delving a whole lot into character-specific stuff, except for maybe the basics every now and then, because that's not the stuff that interests me. What interests me is I want to open up your mental barriers to success. Stuff like learning new stuff and figuring out how to plug that into your game. You can do that on your own just fine with YouTube and a couple free hours and some practice, right? You don't need me to help you with that. And there's going to be all kinds of character specialists coming out of the woodwork to show you how to do their shit better, right? That's not me. But what I would like to do is get good at making these more conceptual lectures that help kind of guide your learning process. Because what I want to do is I want to make it so that when you hit a plateau in your skill development, and everyone hits a plateau eventually, but when you hit that plateau, I want you to be able to look at the set of tools that you and I have talked about. Stuff like understanding why it is you lose, which was the last video, and stuff like game plans, which we're covering today, so that you can have a better idea of how to dissect your own play, how to study other people, and in generally improve, right? That's what I'm trying to do here. And so that's why I really appreciate all the people showing love over the last couple weeks, because it's meant a lot to me to know that, like, you guys are interested in stuff besides just tech videos. Not to hate on tech videos, I love that stuff, but I'm not going to be the guy who makes it. So with that, let's talk about game plans. We're going to start by saying, if you watch the Why You Lose video, you might remember the part where I talked about the idea of simplifying your mental stack. This is an article that Kaya Nisaki wrote. It's a great article. I link it on that video, so you can go check it out. The abbreviated version is basically, you'll react to things more quickly if you already know what to look for and what to do about it. So like, in a fighting game, responding to your opponent's action is a 3-step process. First, you have to process what they did. Second, you have to decide on the correct response. And third, you have to execute on the correct response. So if someone jumps at you, the first thing you have to do is recognize that it's a jump. The second thing you have to do is decide, okay, so he jumped at me, what do I do to beat that? Oh, I'll hit a dragon punch or an anti-air. And then the third thing you have to do is execute the correct response, right? Which is actually doing the input for whatever anti-air move you've chosen. Now, if you think about fighting games like that, that's a pretty good model for talking about time, right? And how you need to think quickly and act quickly in order to play a fighting game. But it's a very reactive model, right? You're waiting for your opponent to do something and then you're countering it. And that's really only half of fighting games, right? That's the defensive half. So in today's episode, we're going to talk more about the other half of the fighting games, and that starts with your game plan. Now, your goal in playing a fighting game is to beat your opponent, and you do that by A, reducing their life meter to 0 before they do the same to you, or B, having more life than your opponent when the timer runs out. In order to do this, you have to make a bunch of decisions, right? You have to decide what attacks you're going to do, when you're going to do them, and why, right? Now, when we talk about reacting to your opponent, that kind of stuff is pretty simple. You practice, you get in training mode, and you learn which attacks of yours beat theirs and when to do them, right? So you might know, eventually with practice, you'll learn, okay, my sweep beats your crouch medium punch, but only if I do it before or at the certain window before or after. In the middle, maybe the crouch medium punch beats a sweep. That's the kind of stuff that you study in matchup practice. However, unless you're a complete god at reading your opponent, like you can read their mind, or you can react to everything they do in like 1 or 2 frames, you're not going to win based only off of reacting your opponent, right? You can test this. You can pick up the controller and you can play against someone where all you do is just stand in one place and try and beat everything your opponent does, right? So you don't press a button until they press a button. And unless you're much better than your opponent, you won't win. This is why we talk about a game plan, right? So in order to win without just responding to everything that your opponent does, you need to make decisions. You need to make proactive decisions about what it is you want to do. If you think about new players in fighting games, they often have no idea why they do something, right? That's what leads to people mashing. If you're a masher, right? Like if you're one of the folks who you play a fighting game and for the first couple times all you do is just hit buttons, right? Basically the plan you're making is, I don't know what I'm supposed to know, so let me just make sure I'm always attacking, right? If I'm always attacking, then I will always have hitboxes on the screen, and odds are one of those will hit, right? It's not a great game plan, but that's fundamentally kind of what the idea is there, right? But even with experienced players, they might play with a game plan in mind, but they might not necessarily realize that's what they're doing. So today we're going to unpack the process of developing a game plan. And in doing so, hopefully we'll give you a tool that you can use to understand like how you should practice your character, how you can diagnose some of your issues when you lose, and most of all is like how can you simplify the game when you're actually playing it. That's one of the basic goals we're trying to do here. So what is a game plan? Well, think of it this way. If the goal of the match is to beat your opponent, right, it's to reduce their life bar to 0 or end the round with more life than them, the game plan is how you get there, right? It's the destination. So if you're trying to Google Maps your way to victory, the game plan is the destination that you're typing in there, right? Or sorry, no. The goal of the match is the destination. The route, how you get there, is your game plan. Now, over the course of a match, you'll have to make a bunch of small decisions. Where should I stand? You know, should I be over here, over here? Should I use my meter now, or should I save it for something else? Should I be aggressive right now, or should I be defensive? Should I go for a reset, or should I go for guaranteed damage? That kind of thing, right? But that's all a lot of really nuanced thinking. You know, if you're doing like mental math in your head to think, oh, should I save this meter, or should I use it for something else, right? Well, maybe I'll get another stock in the time, and so I can still do this other thing. It's super hard to be thinking about that in a match when you're also supposed to be thinking about beating someone's ass. And it's even harder to do that when you're thinking about how to read your opponent's behavior. Ideally, the way it works is that when you jump into a fighting game, you don't have to worry about anything but what your opponent is doing. So a game plan is the kind of thing that you want to work out before you even go to a match, right? Before you type the destination into Google Maps and you pull out of the driveway, but you want to make sure you have your route down first, right? If Waze or Google Maps is still calculating when you're driving, that's no bueno, right? So actually, it's kind of funny because like low to mid-level fighting game competition, right? So like the matches that you play at the first couple tiers in your bracket, a lot of that is not really about whose game plan is better or who's adapting to each other better. It's mostly about who can execute on their game plan better, right? You don't even have to have a fantastic plan. You just need to be able to have a plan and deliver it without getting sidetracked or you know, like mind messed up or anything like that. It's not until the high levels that you really start worrying a lot about or where you should get to start to play an actual mental game with like baits and stuff like that. So what does a game plan look like? If you saw this on Twitter, you probably saw me tweet out an image of Flowchart Ken. I'm gonna go ahead and pull this up right now. We'll switch to the desktop view real quick. And there we go, it's right here in the middle. I will go ahead and zoom in. So, whoo, that's a little hot. There we go. So, some of y'all might remember, these are my notes if you want to see. Some of y'all might remember Flowchart Ken was a big thing that we saw in Street Fighter 4. Right? Especially when people were first going online and the Xbox Live connection was not too great. And a lot of people were new to fighting games or hadn't been really playing since Street Fighter 2 or whatever. And so we saw a lot of what we call the Flowchart Ken. And the basic, like this is, if you Google Flowchart Ken, this is basically the flow, like what comes up, right? If you're listening to this on the podcast, it is a ridiculous Ken flowchart where everything leads back to Shoryuken. And the funny thing is that this is actually a really good example of a game plan that works at a very specific stage in your skill development, right? So the reason people got mad at Flowchart Ken was because they felt like it shouldn't work, right? They felt like they shouldn't be losing to a Ken that pretty much does nothing but dragon punches and then the occasional throw, right? But here's why it works. Ken's dragon punch is a really powerful attack. The way you beat it is by blocking. Right? But that's the main way that you beat it. And it takes a while when you're learning how to play Street Fighter, especially if you're new, it takes a long time before you learn how to properly block, right? So normally what you want to be thinking is not, I want to learn how to defend this attack, especially when you just start playing fighting games. Most people think about how can I beat this attack? And Ken's Dragon Punch is arguably the hardest attack to beat in the game, right? If you're going up against it with another attack. Now remember earlier we were talking about mashing and how like a lot of people when they just start playing fighting games they mash a whole bunch as like it's kind of a weird like absence of a strategy, but the absence of a strategy is basically let me always make sure I have some attacks out here. Flowchart Ken beats mashing because if you always have attacks coming out, they're always going to lose to a Dragon Punch. And the great thing is if you play Flowchart Ken, you don't have to think about what you're doing at all. You can spend all your time reacting to whatever input your opponent is making because your answer is always the same. It's Shoryuken! So that's the idea, right? That's what we want in a game plan. Now, we don't want a game plan that loses to block. And that's basically what Flowchart Ken is, right? You get the Flowchart Ken 2.0 that adds throw in there, and it's super dangerous. But we don't want a game plan that loses to block, but we do want a game plan that makes the in-game decisions you have to make about as simple as Flowchart Ken. If you can get there, then you get to actually focus on what your opponent's doing, and that's usually the part that people actually like about fighting games. It's not fighting against your own character to do what you want to do, and it's not fighting against your own brain to figure out what you want to do. It's fighting against the other person. And with that, one of the, basically the outcome you want is you want everything to be as simple and as mentally lubricated as a Flowchart Ken, right? So this right here, that dude, you see that? Goofy ass Ken? For today, that's actually kind of our role model, okay? So now to go back to my pretty face for a second, I'm just gonna take a sip. Man, I'm talking a lot. So, let's talk a little bit about what we want in a game plan, first of all. As we saw in the Flowchart Ken's example, you basically need two things. You need your game plan to be comprehensive enough that you don't really have to search for an answer for what should I be doing, right? You never want to be thinking about that mid-match. You should already know what it is you should be doing, or at least you should know what you want to be doing. The problems that you solve in a match should be, how do I get there? And ideally, you already know that too. The second thing we know is that we want a game plan that's versatile enough that we shouldn't lose once the opponent figures out what you're doing, right? That's where Flowchart Ken suffers, is that it loses once you realize you should be blocking. You block, Dragon Punch is no longer a threat, right? So those are the two properties that tell you if we want a good game plan. But how do we go ahead and develop one? Well, this is the way I try to think of it, and this is something that I think about. It's especially useful early on in a fighting game's release cycle, right? So as soon as the game comes out, and everyone's trying to figure out what's good, players like Viscount, Evo Marvel champion, Jay Viscount, players like him are actually really good at this, and so I always watch what players like him pick early on, because they tend to be really good at figuring out the answer to this question, right? And this is the question that you ask yourself when you're developing a game plan for a character. The question is, what is the easiest way for me to win with this character? I'll repeat that. What is the easiest way for me to win with this character? So in order to answer that question, you need to sit down with your character, you need to examine their tool set, examine your skill set as a player, right? So what are you good or bad at? And then from there, we can develop a plan that gets you from pick character at the character select screen to victory. Now, how you actually go ahead and do the winning part, right? I'll dig into this a little bit. You'll see what I'm talking about when we actually pick apart some game plans. But the fun part of learning a character is the part where you do the stuff that lets you win. That's actually not what a game plan covers, right? So my example, and we'll delve into this more with actual examples, but if you take a character like Ibuki especially in Street Fighter 4 or Super Street Fighter 4 Arcade Edition, where she had a whole lot of really nasty Vortex stuff, Akuma too. When you think about those characters, you think about the nasty Vortex stuff, right? And for those of you who are new to this, a Vortex is basically it's a string of setups that are very hard to get out of or defend against. And they're often branching, so that if you get knocked down once, you find yourself in this string, and unless you already know the right answers or you get a lucky guess, you probably lost because you're at the receiving end of a whole bunch of mix-ups, right? And so people think of the Vortex part as how you win. That is the state of winning, right? The game plan covers how we get to those vortexes, right? And so the first example that I'm going to walk through, I'll be using both Rising Thunder and Street Fighter examples for the purposes of today's stream, because I expect new players to be getting into both, honestly. But the easiest game plans that you can see in a fighting game, the easiest ones that I've seen anyway, are usually the just get in, right? So Dauntless in Rising Thunder and Dudley in Street Fighter, they both have game plans where if you look at their tool set, if you sit down and look at their tool set, you can pretty much see when you map out the ranges of their moves, you can tell, hey, they have a whole lot of moves that basically only hit you when they're right next to you, right? And as you go and you explore the character, you learn their combos, you learn their knockdown setups, you learn what moves have frame advantage and what don't. you basically realize you can come to realize pretty quickly that that character is designed to be played in close. I'm going to switch real quick to another visual aid. It is a range. It's kind of a range heat map of Dauntless's moves. So if you're not familiar with Dauntless, she's a boxing up close character, very similar to like a little bit of Balrog and Dudley from Street Fighter. That's her on the right. And then over here is Chell. She's the kind of Shoto style character of Rising Thunder. And so this diagram is basically, this is what you need to worry about if you are Chell playing against Dauntless. Now you can look at this and see the top part of the screen, the jumping zone. There isn't really a whole lot that Dauntless has there that's special. But when you look at the area closest to Chell, so the point blank range, and then the range that's kind of just outside of sweep range, and then the range that's at mid-screen, that's where most of Dauntless's moves work. So right off the bat, you know, oh, this chick is supposed to go in close, right? She's supposed to be within about a half screen range. So that right there is a pretty good clue when you're studying a character. And again, this is more useful for new players. But when you're studying a character and you see that all the moves are in close, that's a clue that you should probably be in close, right? Sounds a little oversimplified, I know, but it's one of those things that if you don't think about, it can take you a couple weeks to figure out if you're just trying to learn a character on your own, right? So we'll go back to me. So we know that your easiest path to victory is within sweep range, right? That's where you can threaten with all kinds of stuff. And with both Dauntley and Dudless, they've got a lot of high-low throw mix-ups and then counter hit or like meaty hit options designed to punish a throw tech, right? So if they get in close and they're at a neutral or at frame advantage, then you have a lot of work to do, right? As the defender. And as the Dauntless player, the Dudley player, that's exactly where you want to be, right? So what does this game plan look like? Well, I'm going to pull one up in just a second, but I want to point out, I called this game plan the just get in game plan. That doesn't mean your game plan is mindlessly walk forward. It just means that being up close is where you want to be. Now, if you want to burn meter to get there, that's okay, right? Because what happens is with both those characters, they can do a whole bunch of stuff that doesn't require meter and still gets plenty of damage and gets you that sweet spot for the mix-ups, right? It's more important to be there. And if your opponent is trying to keep you out of that range, you want to be patient, right? It takes a lot of mental effort to actively control a certain spot of the screen, right? And it takes even more mental effort when you know that if you give up that screen, that you're basically going to lose, right? If I just sit at outside half screen range with Dudley or Dauntless, did I confuse the two? Man, I hope I didn't. Whatever. Dudless and Dauntley. But if I'm just sitting at half screen range and waiting for you to do something so that you can mess it up and then I can get in range and beat your ass, if you're sitting there for 99 seconds of in-game time waiting for me to do something, that's just going to be grinding on your brain, right? So I've described this plan as just get in, and I'm going to go ahead and open it up right now. But I want you to know that it doesn't mean you're constantly moving forward. It just means that's the goal. You can get there fast or you can get there slow. That's up to you, and that's the decision you need to make when you play against the player. So the game plan just tells you where you're supposed to go and how to get there. So let's take a look at this. So I made an awesome flowchart in this app called draw.io. It plugs into Google Drive. I like it a lot. We're going to go ahead and zoom in here. So here's a pretty simple game plan. I like the flowchart metaphor for Flowchart Ken, so I decided to use it myself. But basically, we established at the very beginning that Dauntless or Dudley, the fundamental question that they're trying to ask is, am I close enough for a high-low throw mix-up, right? And if you look at this game plan, we start in the upper left with the question that you ask, right? That's the core question to that player or that character. And then the lower right, we've got the destination. The place we want to get to is Mix-Up City, right? But how do we get there? Well, that's how our game plan comes into to help us out, right? So the question we want to ask is, am I close enough for a high-low throw mix-up, right? That's where all our tools are. That's the thing we want to do. The answer is no. Then your action is get closer and then ask yourself that question again, right? That's pretty simple. And this is kind of borne out in the when you look at the character's options. Neither Dauntless nor Dudley really have a whole lot of anything outside of the range of a high-low throw mix-up, right? Which is usually like around sweep range or closer, right? So there's actually pretty much nothing you can do besides that. So you get closer. Is the answer yes? right? We are now close enough for a high-low throw mix-up. Next question is it my turn? And I covered a little bit about this in the Why You Lose video, and I'm probably going to cover this in a video very soon because it's a really important topic. But basically, the question here we're asking is, am I blocking? Do they have momentum? Are they up close and in my face? Right? Am I worried about reacting to their moves right now, or am I thinking about what I get to do to them? If I'm worried about reacting to their moves, then it's their turn, right? It's not my turn. So the answer to the question is no. And if it is my turn, that's when I start actually doing my high-low throw mix-ups. So you can see, if you're watching this on the stream or the video or whatever, you can see the is it my turn question, yes, leads you straight to mix-up city, which is great. And that's why Dauntless is so simple to play, is because you don't have that many questions that you need to ask, right? All it is can I do the things that I'm good at? If so, go do them. And if not, right, if it's not my turn, if I'm blocking something, well, I can Dustbreaker. That's her invincible reversal, basically. Or I can block. I can block and then Dustbreaker. Realistically, if you're playing Dauntless, you're probably just going to Dustbreaker, because why not, right? If you're smarter Dauntless, you might try and block a little bit and then Dustbreaker. But this is basically how it works, right? That right there is all you need to think about in a match to play Dauntless at an effective level. Now, that doesn't mean you don't have to worry about combos or setups or all that kind of stuff. And all that stuff is stuff you need to learn, and it's stuff you need to practice. But fundamentally, whenever you're making a decision that in a game of Rising Thunder, if you're playing Dudley in Street Fighter, whenever you need to make a decision, it should be around answering this question, right? Am I close enough, and is it my turn? If those two answers are yes, then go and do your thing. If not, then worry about how to get there. That's it. So, if we switch back to me for a second, that's a pretty simple game plan, right? Which is cool. And it's cool for new players because it means that you don't lose yourself in the intricacies of what this character can do. Because ultimately what they the thought process is simple. So what you work on is you work on your execution, you work on your reactions. I actually really like playing Dauntless in Rising Thunder. I played a little bit of Dudley in Third Strike, didn't really play him in Street Fighter 4. But I really like playing Dauntless in Rising Thunder because it lets me focus with very simple answers to the other player. Right? So what I get to do is I get to focus entirely on them and what they're doing and how what they're doing stops me from doing what I want to do. I don't have to worry about stuff like, am I going to drop this combo? Should I, which mix-ups or resets should I be using right now? Which part of the screen do I want? Like, this is all stuff which, fundamentally, all I need to do is pay attention to the other character and execute on my game plan, and I'll be fine. It's very simple. And so, I like to play Dauntless into people who are generally better than I am at fighting games. Like, I got to play Reynald a couple times online in Rising Thunder. I got to play F-Champ. I've gotten to play a lot of other really good players. And I like to play Dauntless because it lets me illuminate more of what they're doing better. Because I'm not worried about getting out-mind-gamed, since my game plan is so simple. As an aside, characters that focus on zoning at range, right? So like Sagat and Dalsim, their game plan is also pretty simple, right? It's just, instead of just get in, it's just don't let them get in. You end up breaking down your options at any given range to which pokes and fireballs or whatever let you create more space. So either way, the game plan is simple. Now that isn't to say that those characters are easy to play, right? As it turns out, like, Dauntless is pretty easy. Dudley takes a lot of execution to get really good at, right? Sagat and Dalsim on the zoning side of things, like, they're actually pretty difficult to play because Capcom makes it hard to play a successful zoning character. But fundamentally, the decisions that you're making in-game are pretty easy, right? The question of how hard is it for you to execute on your game plan is different. And that tends to be more a matter of, what the character is designed to do. So, like, if I want to design a just get in game plan for Dalsim, well, I can. But unless I'm playing Super Turbo, where Dalsim is actually this rushdown character, unless I'm playing Super Turbo, it's going to be super hard to actually execute on that plan, right? So now we're going to move on to a slightly harder game plan. And this is where we talk about vortexing, or vortex characters, or whatever you want to call them. I'm going to use Crow from Rising Thunder as one example, and Ibuki as another. In Street Fighter 4. She wasn't as vortexy in Third Strike. I actually started playing Ibuki when I started playing Third Strike. It's fun times. And I moved on to characters that aren't so hard to use. So once more, we're going to bring up my flowchart. If you are watching this on an audio source, I will describe things to the best of my ability. But you might want to check out the video anyway, just to see my lovely flowcharts. So here's basically how they work. Oh, there we go. So Crow and Ibuki are both examples of characters that have a lot of tools to open up an opponent once they're knocked down. And that lets them set up like cross-up shenanigans that are hard to block, which gets you big damage and more knockdowns, right? So that's basically what we call a Vortex character. And if most of your fighting game experience is with Street Fighter 4, you'd be forgiven for thinking that this is basically every character's game plan, because in Street Fighter 4, pretty much every character's game plan revolves at some point around a knockdown. The nature of that game basically made it so that characters that were built for knockdown into setup that knocks you down into another setup that knocks you down into another setup, like that is just the core of how Street Fighter 4 works. Very few characters deviate from that from that skeleton. And so if that's most of your experience, you probably think that that's what fighting games are about. Now, I cut my teeth on CVS 2, hence the True Love Making shirt. Yeah. And in CVS 2, knockdown characters and knockdown Vortex characters really aren't where most of the game is. A lot of it is how you play the neutral game and how you basically pick characters with overpowered pokes or whatever, right? It's its own thing. I love CVS 2. I'll do a stream on it someday. But like, it's more than just knockdowns. And it took me a long time to adapt to the fact that Street Fighter 4 is mostly knockdowns. Now, just so we're clear though, they win off the Vortex. So that the easiest way is, the easiest way to do your thing is start with a knockdown, right? And so your game plan is going to focus on how you get that knockdown. But just like it wasn't that simple with Dauntless and Dudley, it's not that simple with Crow and Ibuki either. Because the thing for both those characters, and this should be true for most Vortexy characters, is that they don't have much in the way of defensive tools, right? Crow has very poor defensive tools overall. He doesn't really have any good anti-airs. He has one special that he can choose as kind of like a counter teleport thing. And Ibuki has like that EX Dragon Punch that's okay, or she can focus and she can backdash, but fundamentally they don't really have any useful dangerous stuff when they're knocked down. So your knockdown, your game plan isn't about all the great things that you want to do once you knock them down. It's about how you decide when you should be going for a knockdown that lets you start your shenanigans, and when should you be worried on your own safety, right? The way you can kind of think about this is like, if I pick Crow or if I pick Ibuki and I basically win off of a sweep or a throw, or like I get a really strong advantage, that's great. But if I'm playing against a Ryu or a Chell and I just walk up to Footsie's range and try and go for a sweep, there's a really good chance that I'll get knocked down and outpoked, and then I'll get wrecked, right? Or maybe I'll get pushed out of range by fireballs, and then I won't be able to get close, and I'll have taken damage, and now I'll be fighting from a deficit, and it's all no good, right? If I get knocked down as Crow in particular, it's really hard to reset the momentum without using a kinetic deflect burst, basically. And you only really get one of those around. So, so basically, the cost of a knockdown, of getting knocked down with either character is very, very high, right? So we could think of the game plan as like, get a knockdown and then do a bunch of stuff. But that isn't actually useful for our purposes, because what happens is, we end up in these situations where we could win or we could lose based off of like one sweep. And that isn't a really good game plan, right? That's basically throwing the entire game to a 50-50, right? If you want that, then just get into competitive like coin flipping or something, because it's way less work than Street Fighter or Rising Thunder or any fighting games. So instead of thinking of the game plan as how do we get a knockdown, the way I would describe it, at least for Crow, and if you're not familiar with Crow, he's a little bit of a weird character, but the main thing you want to know for this is that he has this projectile. It's like a frisbee. We call it the disc, but it's a frisbee that he throws in the air in one of 3 different trajectories, and it's an arc that cuts across the screen. So it's not just horizontal, it's also vertical. And if I'm playing Crow and I can make you block that disc, then I can run in, I can try and cross you up, I can try and go for a sweep with the frame advantage. Or I can go for a throw, right? And so all of those will lead to a knockdown. So my game plan isn't really how do I knock you down, it's what do I have to do to get you to block a disc? Because if I can get you to block a disc, then I can do the other stuff. Right, so that's the core of the plan. And what we're gonna do right now is go ahead and walk through this flowchart right here. So, like I said, the first thing that you have to worry about as a Crow player or as an Ibuki player is, am I safe? If I'm safe, right, then that's great, and I can start thinking about how to attack. But if I'm not safe, if I'm worried that they're like if they're in my face and they're pressuring me, or they're about to sweep me or throw me or whatever, then I need to worry about that, because there's no way I can get you to block a disc if you're in my face. You're just in way too close. So we start the upper left corner, right? And what we get here is, am I safe? If the answer is no, then get the fuck out of there, right? Backdash, use your defensive options. If you have to, use your burst. Whatever it takes, you need to get out there, because your game plan doesn't start until you can answer that question yes. So we go GTFO, we ask that question again. Am I safe? The answer is yes. Cool. Let's throw a disc. The plan is throw a disc and then go in for a sweep or a throw or a cross-up. Now, there are all kinds of different places on the screen that you can do that. You can do it from full screen, you can do it from half screen. There are different setups that you use for each range, because the trajectory and when they block it in the animation matters. But we're not worried about that for the game plan. That's a matter of tactics and execution. We can worry about that in the lab or whatever. Right now, we want to keep this as simple as possible. So we throw the disc. Did it hit? Right? And by which I mean, not was it a clean hit? Like, did they block it? Is a fine question. The answer is yes. So the way you want to think about this is, did they block the disc, and then did you get the hit afterwards? The sweep, the throw, or the cross up, right? If any of those three things hit, then congratulations, you are in Vortex City. And you can knock them down, you can throw a disc, you can jump over them again to make the cross up ambiguous, you can do all kinds of fun shit. You can go for heavy guard or fuzzy guard setups that make it so they don't even think they're blocking right, whatever, right? Welcome to Vortex City, population them, they're probably going to lose. If the answer is no, right? So if you went for the throw and they teched it, you went for the sweep and they blocked it, or you went for the cross up into whatever and it didn't work. And the next question we ask is, do I have meter, right? So if I have super meter that I want to burn on this, or kinetic advance meter that I can use to cancel an attack to keep my pressure going, right? The answer is yes. If I have meter, well, then that's what Crow uses his meter on, right? He doesn't really have that many defensive options for his meter. So we're going to go ahead and say, do I have meter? If the answer is yes, great. Throw a disc, cancel it, go for your thing, do it all over again, right? Did it hit? If the answer is no, do you still have meter? Probably not. Then get the fuck out of there. Because the longer Crow stays in the danger zone, the more risk he's at of getting knocked down, right? If you don't have any advantage, if you don't have a disc that's covering your entrance, right? It's, like if you don't have a fireball backing you up or whatever, then Crow's just sitting there, and yeah, he could get an attack, but he could also get knocked down. If he gets knocked down, he's going to lose. So you want to get the fuck out of there until you're safe, and then you throw another disc. Your end goal is Vortex City. The game plan is how you get there. And this is what differentiates a hyper-aggressive Crow that wins in the low divisions, same with Ibuki, right? This is what differentiates the hyper-aggressive playstyle that will get you out of kind of scrub tier when they don't punish you, right? Like if you get knocked down once and that doesn't mean you lose, you're kind of playing in the weaker tier, right? But at a certain point, you learn that you need to dial it back a little bit. You learn, okay, I am going in too hard, and I feel like this game is turning into a coin flip of whether my follow-up after they block a disc worked or not. And if that's the way you're playing it, then you're not playing it right. Because you're basically saying, hey, I'm sticking around and I'm going to try and get that hit so hard, but at some point you're not playing with the advantage, right? If that disc isn't covering you, then you shouldn't be in someone's face, because then it's just a question of whether they swept before you did or whether they dragon punched at just the right time. What you want to do is you want to play a hit and run Crow or Ibuki or whatever, and that means you have to be willing to get the heck out of there, to retreat to a safe range, and then go in and try your shenanigans again. All right, so that was the second example, and I would consider this a kind of medium difficulty game plan because, well, it's more nuanced than Dauntless and Dudless, right? Damn it, I did it again. Dauntless and Dudley. And it's designed, basically, to address more nuanced problems, which is like the Crow that's going in too much and losing, or the Crow that's not taking advantage of enough opportunities and losing. The third example, and this one I actually don't have a flowchart for because I couldn't, I was thinking about it and it's just too hard, honestly, to flowchart. My third example is a character that wins in the neutral. So I'm thinking about Chell and Ryu for this, but there are other characters that win here as well, obviously. Now, Chell and Ryu and other characters that kind of win in the neutral, and we'll talk a little bit more about what that means, but fundamentally, answering the root question, right? What is the easiest way for me to win with this character is pretty difficult. And the reason is because these characters are kind of designed to play specifically against the other player. And well, yeah, we'll just get into it. So like, the thing about Chell and Ryu is that their toolset is so versatile that there isn't an immediate focus to their game plan, right? So with the first two types of characters, it's very easy to look at them and think, oh, this is what they have that's good. This is how I get there, right? With Chell and Ryu, you can actually do anything. So you can play a rushdown Shoto, right? And you can just get all up in their face and make super hard reads and be aggressive, right? Punko did that really well with Ryu early on in Street Fighter, right? They can get aggressive, but they won't be as good at it, right? Ryu Rushdown is not as effective as other characters that are devoted specifically to that kind of thing, right? Like a Rufus or a Yun. So Ryu's options are not nearly as scary. Same with Chell, right? Their options are not as scary for attacking and being aggressive, and they're probably more expensive to make happen, right? Like, Yun gets more off of a knockdown or a dive kick, even if he has to spend meter to do it, than Ryu does. The other thing is, you can zone, right? You can pressure off a knockdown, or sorry, you can zone, right? Like, they both have fireballs, they're really good fireballs, right? But their tools are not as comprehensive as, say, a Sagat or a Dalsim, right? So with Ryu, he really has one attack that hits at full screen, and it's the fireball. And yes, it comes in 3 different speeds, and they're great, but it only covers one line, right? One vector. With Sagat and Dalsim, they've got a whole bunch of space coverage, and so they get to spend. They have all kinds of different options for playing a dedicated zoning game plan. So if Ryu wants to keep you out, he basically has to stick on it to his fireball and then his dragon punch when you try and jump over the fireball, which is good, but it's not a full zoning tool set. You can also pressure off a knockdown, right? So both characters do have, at least so far, right? They have some vortexy stuff. Ryu has setups. He's got high-low mix-ups. He's got throws. He's got all kinds of stuff. And he can be scary if he's in your face, but he's not as scary as Dudley is, right? You're not going to be as worried about like counter hit setups into dizzies and all kinds of fun stuff with Ryu compared to playing against a Dudley player, right? So basically, you can do a whole bunch of stuff. You can do anything. But you can't do anything as well as someone who's more focused on doing that thing. So when your tool set is as mixed as that, your game plan has to be like similarly diverse, right? In order to win a round, you're going to need to be rushing down when your opponent wants to zone. You're going to want to zone when your opponent wants to get in your face. You're going to want to go for enough mix-ups to keep them scared and make them start worrying like, oh, do I have to reversal to get out of this, right? But you're also going to want to be patient so you can bait those reversals when they're all spooked, right? And the better you get at playing, at playing fighting games and with these characters, the more you have to learn how to switch this kind of stuff up, right? A lot of players call this going hot and cold. You see that mostly with Ryu players in Street Fighter. It's like they the great Ryu players know when to get all up in your face and then when to stop and wait for you to do something stupid. Now, that's different from everything we've been talking about so far because you're not just playing against the opponent's character, you're also playing against the opponent, right? So for you, the game plan there is more like testing them. You need to learn as much about your opponent as possible. You need to test them and see what they want, right? So if I'm going up against like a Yun or a Dalsim, I have a basic idea of what that character wants, but I need to know what the player wants, right? And then once I figure that out, I need to make you think that you can get it. And then right when you think you can get it, I need to take it away from you. And for these characters, most of that happens in the neutral game, right? Basically, your game plan is not the way you answer that question, what is the easiest way for me to win in this character, is usually stand at this optimal range or cover this optimal screen space, right? For Shotos, it's usually standing right outside sweep range, right? Because that's where your sweeps are, your sweep and your crouch medium kick are useful, your fireball is useful, and your dragon punch is useful, right? Whereas in other ranges, those moves kind of change their utility. Now, you need to occupy that space, and then you need to kind of figure out what your opponent is going to do next, right? Like, fundamentally, in order to play these characters, you kind of have to learn how to read people's minds. Now, that's not always the case. Like, Ryu in Super Turbo, his fireball and his dragon punch are so good that the amount of hard reads you have to make are lower. Because his fireball is just, the recovery is low, it's harder for the opponent to deal with at the right range, and so you have to make fewer reads, but fundamentally the core skill set that they emphasize is still the same thing. So yeah, your game plan is more like, occupy the space on the screen where all your tools work, and then figure out what they want and like stop them from getting it. Now, the core of that the core of the tools that kind of make that game plan possible is the fireball, right? Because fireballs not only control a whole bunch of space, they also push your opponent out of space, right? Like if your opponent is in a spot and they block a fireball, it pushes them away even further. It kind of penalizes them for thinking, right? If they're sitting there and they haven't properly reacted to your fireball and punished it, it penalizes them for being slow, right? If it's a Dauntless or a Dudley trying to get in and they eat a fireball, that pushes them out of their comfort zone, right? So you can use fireballs as kind of the stalling tactic that helps you figure out what your opponent wants, right? And you can use it to test them. You can see, okay, do you jump after I throw 3 fireballs? How about 4? How about 5, right? So you can use that to kind of gauge your opponent's mental state. And that's a super powerful tool, and it's fantastic. But it's also a risky tool, right? Because the thing is, when you're throwing fireballs in the space that they're useful, that's also the space in which if your opponent reads or reacts properly, you're going to get a huge damage punish, right? They're going to focus attack through it, or they're going to jump over it and kill you or whatever, right? So your goal in your game plan for one of these neutral characters is more about, the way I describe it is, your goal is to throw 1 less fireball than they think you're going to throw at all times, right? So you win by making them eat fireballs and punishing their attempts to read yours. Sometimes, depending on the player, it's not depending on the matchup, depending on the player, you do this by throwing like 30 fireballs and then never throwing it, and just making them think that you're going to throw a 31st, right? Or maybe you throw 30 fireballs and you never throw them again. And for some others, you just throw 1 at the start of the round and you don't do it for the rest of the round. And it's that simple, right? But it's all about knowing what kind of person you're playing against. And it's so hard. Like this is why I play Ryu in fighting games. It's because I think it's actually the most fun. And it's also this is also why these characters usually do well in the beginning of a fighting game, right? It's not just because their tools are easy to use and understand and we're all accustomed to them. It's also because it's easier to deny your opponent's game plan early in a game's life cycle and take advantage of their weaknesses, right? Because you can do everything with these characters. And the other characters like, Ibuki or whatever can pretty much only do 1 or 2 things well, right? So like early on, it's actually pretty easy to win with these characters because you can do everything. So you just need to do everything okay, and you just need to be able to deny your opponent their game plan. You need to keep them out of their comfort zone, right? But the longer these games go on, the more you have to learn how to play against specific people or specific archetypes of people. And that shit's super hard to do in a best-of-3 tournament situation, right? This is one of the reasons why I think Daigo as a player has gotten really, really good at like best-of-10 exhibitions, right? And I don't know if you remember, around the time that Ultra Street Fighter 4 came out, they had him doing a bunch of like special exhibitions against like other top players, and he was murdering everybody. Right? But the problem is that you put him in like a best-of-3 bracket where he has to beat like 20 people in a row or whatever, and that's hard because there's going to be a lot of just random people who blow you up and you don't even realize it. So like fundamentally, playing these characters can be harder at higher skill levels because you have to be able to quickly adapt to any new players or any player's psychology. And if they can do their game plan better than you can do yours, and better than, which really means if they can do their game plan before you can figure out what their game plan is and stop it, then you're gonna lose. Okay. So the reason I didn't flowchart this out is because I looked at what it would look like, and it's a huge fucking mess. Instead, what I'm going to direct you to is one of my favorite match videos of all time. It is John Choi versus Daigo at EVO 2014. I'm going to paste it in chat, and I'm going to go ahead and put it in the YouTube description and stuff as well. But basically, it's John Choi playing Ryu into Daigo's Evil Ryu. And I also, if you check out the link, there's the video, and then there's an interview that I did with a bunch of people that kind of explains why John won the match. But fundamentally, if you look at that, that is nothing but like testing each other and controlling each other's space, and it's what I love about Street Fighter, to be honest. It is the most fun that I have when I'm playing these games. But those guys got there from playing these games for like upwards of 20 years, and they've played against each other multiple times, and that's why it looks so cool, right? Very rarely do we see matches look as cool elsewhere in the bracket, especially in like pool play and stuff, because most of the time it's just how good is your game plan compared to someone else's game plan. So yeah, fundamentally, game plans, to recap, they're a tool. They're a tool that you can use to improve as a player. And basically, the way you want to think of it is you want to think of this as offloading all your hard decisions and all your strategic big picture decisions that you make in a match to before you actually start the match, right? So you want to know, fundamentally, the question that you're trying to answer is, what is the easiest way to win with this character? And then the game plan is identifying that point and figuring out how you get there. Tech, setups, all that stuff is great, and you want to be able to plug it in your game plan. But you also want to use this to be like, hey, there's this really cool setup, and that's awesome, but it's kind of a rushdowny thing, and I don't want to play this character rushdowny, so I'm going to do something else, right? Or maybe I'm going to learn it, and I want to be able to choose it if possible, but I'm not going to build it around, I'm not going to integrate it into my core game plan because that it doesn't fit. I don't want to rush down this character. I want to play more of a zoning style, or I want to play the neutral or whatever. That doesn't mean you shouldn't learn the tech. You should have it available in case you want to switch to your plan B game plan, which is, oh no, I got exposed in the neutral, now I'm just going to rush down like a crazy freak. That's fine. It's okay to have multiple game plans. And like I said, with characters like Ryu, you actually have to have multiple game plans. Because if you just play on one script, he's super easy to beat. He's just free, right? But yeah, fundamentally, the game plan is all the hard thinking that you can offload to you before the match, right? So when you go into the match, whether you win or lose is just a question of can you manage to execute your game plan better or sooner than your opponent can execute theirs. And if either of your I guess the thing you're worried about is if your game plan can't hold up, then you know you have another plan to switch to, whatever it is. But the last thing you want to do is you don't want to be making big strategic decisions in the middle of a match, right? You just don't. You're going to be too slow, you're going to get blown up, and it's going to be super frustrating. Instead, you want to be able to think about that stuff in advance, right? And this is something that you can use when you're planning, when you're trying to figure out what you like in a new character. This is something that tells you, hey, should I be up in their face? Should I be attacking all the time? Like, that might feel fun, but it might not be the optimal way to win. And if you can sit and reflect on your character's tool set, that's what gets you to figure out the game plans that actually work. And as an aside, I think one of the most brilliant game plans that I saw in Street Fighter 4 was Gamer B's Elena from EVO last year. It's funny to me because I had played a similar game plan. So he played around healing, right? He basically picks Elena so he can do like really good damage with footsies in his in matchups that are bad for Adon. And he can use healing to slow down the pace of the game, to burn his opponent's resources, and just generally like win, right? And it was fantastic. And I've played like that with Nakaruru in CVS2. I played K Nakaruru, who also has a healing super and can do a lot of fun stuff like that because like if you play her in K Groove, her meter goes up when she takes damage. So if someone punishes her healing super, she might still have enough, she might get enough meter to do another healing, and it's hilarious, right? It's also super frustrating, and you usually win from time over. So like that right there is an example of a brilliant game plan because he could look at all his other competitors and be like, they're better at me than these other things, and I can't learn another character to the depth needed to countermatch them. But I can get an even matchup with Elena, who requires, for the most part, less work than a lot of other characters to be able to execute that game plan. And so Elena became a really good pocket, like, secondary pick for him without taking his attention away from Adon. I thought that was really cool. And so even at like a high level, you can see stuff like game plans be crucial in getting you to the fucking EVO finals one round away from the championship. That's fucking awesome. So that's pretty much all I got on the topic of game plans. Thank you so much for watching. If you appreciated that stuff, by all means, share my stream, share the video. I'll put the video on youtube.com/pattheflip tomorrow. It'll also go up on the podcast. And if you're checking this on the podcast, thank you so much. If there's any questions, I got a couple minutes. I can take some in chat. But in general, just thank you so much to the people who keep on watching and keep on giving me like useful feedback and sharing my stuff, because ultimately, like, y'all are the reason I'm doing this stuff, and it's super fun. I'm learning a lot. Like, this is actually really useful for me too, because I get to learn a lot about how I can improve and grow as a player. So yeah, thank you.